the ideal husband. What every woman expects. He will be a brilliant conversationalist, a very sensitive man, truly kind, understanding, and loving, a very hard worker, a man who helps around the house by vacuuming the floor, taking care of the garden, cooking, and helping his wife look after the kids. He changes diapers gladly and even washes windows. He will be someone with the emotional and physical strength, as smart as Einstein, but as good-looking as Ben Affleck. That's what she wants. Here's what she gets. He always takes her to the best restaurants, and someday he may actually take her in one. He doesn't have ulcers, he gives them. Anytime he has an idea, he has the whole thing in a nutshell. And he's a miracle worker every time he works. Don't get ahead of me now. Every time he works, it's a miracle. Occasionally, he has flashes of silence that make his conversations brilliant. Now, here is the ideal wife that every man expects. She always smiles and looks like Scarlett Johansson. She could have married Ben Affleck, but she only had eyes for you. And her favorite hobbies: vacuuming, mowing the lawn, snow shoveling. She hates shopping and detests credit cards, and she wishes you would hang out more with the other guys so she could get some sewing done. And she loves you because you are so sexy. Now, that's what he wants. This is what he gets. She speaks at 450 words per minute with gusts of 600. See, she was once a model for a totem pole. That was then, but this is now. She's a light eater. As soon as it becomes light, she starts eating. She's used artificial sugar for so many years, she has artificial fat. And no matter what she does with it, her hair looks like an explosion from a steel wool factory. Seriously, there's a difference between expectation and realization, is there not? As we said last time in part 4 of Family Matters, men and women are different, to which some of you cheer "Vive la différence," because it's our difference that bring us together. Men and women are different, and yet they're made for one another. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 23, it says, as it recounts the story of the first man, Adam, the first woman, Eve, both of whom were literally made for each other. And when God brought them together in a wedding ceremony like no other, performed by God, the creator of the universe himself, he spoke to them as he speaks to us today, saying, "Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall be one flesh." To which Adam, in a manner of speaking, responds by lifting his glass and giving a toast to her, saying, "Bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." Man and woman are different, yet made for each other. And yet, sadly, in this unusual age in human history, in this moment of an evil epoch of time when our families are under attack by sinister forces within the home and outside the home, and by the enemy of our souls who would laugh with glee when our families break up, and when there's broken homes, and when there's unnecessary divorce and hurt and heartbreak. We need today, as never before, to look at the subject of marriage and look at it hard through the lens of Christian values. And that's why today's title is His Needs and Her Needs. Titles are not copyright, so I borrow that title from a famous book by the name of Willard Harley, a book by the same name. And the title sums it up. It presents the problem and also the solution. as we learn to meet the other person's needs? Well, as I said, the purpose of this study is to look at several different needs, some today, some next week, with a view to awareness and acceptance and action. So within the context of holy, sacred marriage under God, we need to realize that his needs are not her needs and vice versa. And the requisite for us to do is become aware and learn how to meet the other person's needs. A subject which is akin but not identical to Paul's admonition for all of us when he says in Philippians chapter 2 verse 14, let each of you look out not only for his own interests, or I could translate that needs, but also for the needs of others. But before we go any further, I need to make a disclaimer. Since when I give these categorizations in a few minutes, there are always exceptions and variations, and I need to say that lest we fall into the trap of stereotyping. So when I make these distinctions, there are always some of both parts in men and women. In fact, in some homes, it's actually reversed. And all of this to say that these are, as they say, the exceptions that prove the rule. So let's begin with one of his needs. His need, companionship. That's the first thing. And a passage we read in our scripture reading from Malachi chapter 2, verse 14 and 15 addresses this to all males of the species Homo sapien, saying, she is your companion and the wife of the covenant. Did he not make them one with a portion of the Spirit in their union? Did you hear that? She is your companion. And 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 11 also says, nevertheless, the Lord, the woman is not dependent of man, nor man dependent on woman. And this is a deep need for companionship that every man has. And is perhaps expressed no better than in the most romantic book in the Bible, if not everywhere, one that Christians often avoid reading because it's too sexy. And it's the book Song of Solomon, otherwise known as Songs of Songs, otherwise known as Canticles, sometimes just known as Songs. And there's a beautiful passage in there where Solomon says of his bride, this is my beloved, this is my friend. And it's vital because many marriages fail because they start off in love, but they've never learned to become friends. And a lasting marriage, what he needs and what you need, women, is to be best friends. Is she your best friend? Is he your best friend? Now, you say, I'm not really that friendly. I don't have a lot of friends. And I want to say, date your mate. I don't do that, you say. I'm not that kind of person. Well, I want to ask you, what did you do before you were married? You dated her. You did fun things together. You did things together, perhaps tennis or canoeing, or going for long walks together, or going out for dinner and a movie. You spent time together. And after you're married, why does it say, thou shalt not date? It doesn't say that. Date your mate. And my wife June, which some of you know I always try to say my June, since none of the rest of you men get any ideas. My June and I, we like to, every 2 weeks or so, have a date. And we had a wonderful date about a week ago. Before that, I'd taken Jonathan to Jasper for a special dad and Sunday. But last week, I took my wife June for a special day for us. And we got up around 6, and we're out of the door 6:30 and came back about 10. 4 hours there, 4 hours back, and most of the day there. And we did all kinds of things. On the way, we talked. We discussed the lyrics of favorite songs and what they really meant. And when we got there, we went up to Maligne Lake and kayaked for a while. And then we went to Maligne Canyon for a few minutes. And then we drove out to Pyramid Lake and then took a drive to Angel Glacier by Mount Cavell and made a long little hike there. And we just spent time together, and it was so good. When was the last time you spent time with your best friend, your husband or wife? Because that's what he needs. Well, men may not do much talking as a woman, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but they just need a companion who'll be there. I remember a time when I was teaching at a Bible college in Newfoundland, and I had a best buddy, one of the fellow teachers, and we got out my canoe and we went and drove to a lake, and we put in my trusty, really rusty metal canoe, and it was a cold day and windy day. In fact, after we were fishing for a couple of hours, it was so cold, and we were too stupid to have brought gloves. We ended up taking our extra pair of socks and putting them on our hands. Can you just imagine this? And we're fly fishing. And we didn't hardly say a word, except, got a bite? Or look at that one, I think he's a 4-pounder. And at the end of the day, we put back on the canoe, on the roof of my car, and said, wasn't that a great day? Guys just like to be together. And ladies, he needs you to be his companion. We need you just to be with us. Now, I want to say I wish when I went to Jasper you were there, but that would be a lie. I'm glad you weren't. Because to use the old cliche from a musical some years ago called Romeo and Juliet, how does it go? This was a time for us, as the song says. Well, we've heard of this countless times, that the family that prays together stays together. Have you heard that? Well, I want to tell you that the family that plays together stays together too. Just having fun together, laughing, old-fashioned clean fun, activity, play. And couples who have fun together hardly ever split up. And the Bible also says in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 9, and also 11, 2 are better than 1, for if they fall, one will lift up his companion. If 2 lie down together, they will keep each other warm. But how can one be warm alone? And again, the scripture that we quoted earlier and was read to us, Solomon says, this is my beloved, this is my friend. His need, companionship. Well, she has a need too. Communication. If we need companionship, she needs communication. That's the second thing. And the Bible strikes this chord, saying in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7, likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way. Emphasis on understanding. And he goes on to say, and there's a promise and a threat here. He says, so that your prayers may not be hindered. And the problem when it comes to this issue of marriage is that the reason so many marriages fail is they pass the test through living together and fail the grade through lack of understanding. Likewise, live with your wives, he said, in an understanding way. You see, we listen, but we don't hear, and we don't understand. And I'm guilty of that. And I'm preaching to myself. And what women crave for is to be understood. I've told you about our friends who live down the street that we've been witnessing to and have become deep friends with. And I mentioned one time that they had their 60th anniversary. And I was pleased to be the MC. And afterwards, a few days later, about a week later, we went and took them out to Swiss Chalet. And we had chicken and all the trimmings and so forth. And as we were talking, my June asked, "Now, you've been married 60 years. Can you give us young people," she didn't say it that way, but she said, "What contributed most to 60 years of marriage?" And immediately, Ray, an old man, Parkinson's, bent over, he said, "Communication. That's the secret." And she echoed without thinking, "Communication. Communication. It's all about communication." But I have to say that generally, women excel in this. By comparison, we men are novices. And I was reading up this week, and as I've read up throughout the years on this subject, that there have been studies to show that even babies of the female sex, have more lip movement, hundreds of times more lip movements over a day than baby boys. Go figure. And they did also studies of children, preschool age, just about to go into kindergarten, and almost 100% of the sounds that girls made were word-related. Only 68% of the sounds made by boys could be literal words, meaning about 32% of little boys were just making noises. Airplane noises, meow. Explosion noises, gun noises. So I know what you ladies are thinking. I'm not sure if my husband has really graduated from that stage. And when he groans and grunts and snores, just remember we come by it honestly. Well, I'm also told from the studies that there is an inherent physiological difference in the formation of the female brain than the male brain when it comes to that part of the brain that controls speech compared to the male brain. Women are naturally better communicators than men. In fact, it's been my experience that women often are better preachers than men. That's true. I've seen it again and again and again. Well, there was a psychologist, a woman, speaking to a conference of women, and she was talking about this fact. And one woman, to the applause of everyone afterwards, she said, "Does that mean that our husbands have suffered brain damage?" And everyone laughed, and the speaker said, "No, but you've heard about the fall of Adam? Well, he fell, he bumped his head, and men have been suffering ever since." About 20 wives just nudged their husbands. Seriously, over the years of counseling families, only once have I ever heard a man say, "She just doesn't talk to me enough." Just once. But how many times have we heard the opposite? "He won't talk to me." And you can almost state it as an absolute. Show me a quiet, reserved man who fails to talk to his wife, and I will point to you a frustrated woman. The strong, silent type appeal during the dating session, but they make lousy husbands. And the inattentive husband is almost a universal complaint. So much so that the failure to communicate is one of the leading factors for wives to defect the marriage by affairs. Let's take a scenario. I'll call her Jane, and I'll call him Richard, and I'll call the other man Lauren. And Jane is as typical of so many women who defect from marriage through an affair. Her husband, Richard, she said sorrowfully, simply stopped talking to me. Then she said, so I finally went out to find anybody who would. So she joined a book club, and people started talking about the books and the meanings of things in their own lives. And there was a man in the group called Lorne. And they just went out for coffee together. Then it went to a formal dinner. And she said, I didn't even see it coming because I wasn't accustomed to any man ever talking to me at such a deep level. And then she said, well, just one thing led to the next. Men, take time, make time to listen and understand, as the Scripture says. And listen not just to the words, but the message be underneath the words and the emotional aspect. And when you listen, don't try to figure out the problem before she's even finished the question. Because you see, men, as someone has said, are Mr. Fix-Its. We fix things. We're good with making things and fixing things with our hands, as our dads and grandfathers were, at least some of us. And so men have this Mr. Fix-It attitude, and we want to fix the problem where she just wants to share it out. So she wants a shoulder to cry on and not a solution. She needs your shoulder more than your mouth. And so if companionship is his need, conversation is hers, and there's hers and something else, he needs admiration. Admiration. For do you know, ladies, what men fear more than death? It's failure, inadequacy, incompetence. I may have mentioned a few years ago that I read a famous book that my son and I have an interest in because we're men and we like airplanes. And so I read the book by Tom Wolfe. You've heard that name. And it was called The Right Stuff. It was not only about not stunt pilots, but test pilots, but also the beginnings of the space race and the first NASA astronauts. But at a deeper level, it was a psychological study of how test pilots think. And in one chapter, they're talking about Alan B. Shepard, who was a test pilot and then became the first American in space. Not John Glenn. He orbited the Earth. But Alan Shepard was the first one in. And is about to take off, 10, 9, 8. And he whispers this prayer, even though he's not a religious man. And he says, Lord, I'm not going to say it how he said it, but Lord, help me not to mess up. Now, here's this man in just 2 seconds. He's about to be hurtled into space violently on top of this explosive bomb, a Redstone rocket, which wasn't even made for a man. It was made to be an intercontinental ballistic missile, and half of them blew up as they took off. And he's saying, not, Lord, don't let me die. Don't let me die by pilot error, because that's a fate worse than death. And so we fear incompetence, failure. So we need to be assured. And we need you to help us give self-confidence. So then listen to the prescription that Dr. Paul scribbles on his pad of Ephesians chapter 5, verse 33. It says, let the wife see that she respects her husband. Respect as in admiration. Because you see, what every little boy and what every man wants to be is that knight in shining armor coming to the rescue of the damsel in distress. I have to tell you that I've been taking medication for a lot of seizures that I've been having, and I'm having trouble getting out certain words and even a lack of short-term memory. And sometimes I can see the word, but I just can't say it. So I need your grace and forgiveness for this. And if I'm talking to you and I get the deer in the headlights look on my face, just be a little understanding. Now, if he needs admiration, the last thing I want to talk about today, but there's more next week, is her need for affirmation. Now, I know that admiration and affirmation kind of cross over, and we both need a little bit of each. But she needs to be affirmed. And that affirmation is spoken of in Proverbs chapter 31, verse 28. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Here's the next part. So also her husband praises her, and she needs your praise. The scripture says, grant her honor. And also in Peter chapter 3, verse 7, husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives and treat them with respect. That's affirmation. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 4 says, an excellent wife is a crown on her husband's head. And Proverbs chapter 31, verse 10 says, she is worth far more than rubies. She wants you to know, she wants to hear from you, you are special. You are special. And as we read earlier in the scripture reading, don't just compliment her for her outward beauty. You can do that. She needs that too. But it's the inner beauty, and the Bible speaks about that beauty that does not fade or wrinkle with age. 1 Peter chapter 3 speaks about the contrast between outward beauty and inward beauty. Outward beauty described in terms of elaborate hairstyle and gold and jewelry and fine clothes. And those are not necessarily bad, but what he's pointing to is the inward beauty in terms of the hidden person of the heart with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. So affirmation is a deep-seated need, the need to be accepted, the need to be valued by another human being. And it has to do with her self-worth and self-esteem and her self-significance, to affirm her, not just for what she does, but for who she is. Well, I want you to conduct an experiment. And if you're not sitting beside your wife, if you're married, move right now beside her, not away. Will you sit beside your husband right now, or your wife? This is an experiment. And I want you to hold hands, guys, with your wife. I know some of you haven't done it in years, but you can do it. I want you to hold hands right now and keep your hands held together. I know it's uncomfortable for some of you. And if you're engaged, do the same thing. Hold each other's hands. And I want you to know that a girl in her early childhood gets this feeling of acceptance and love and self-worth from her dad. Not just her mom, but there's a special relationship between dads and their girls. And that's where she gets her self-worth. Some of you didn't get that as children. But whether you did or whether you didn't, now that you're grown up, women get their self-esteem, their value, their worth, their sense of preciousness from the husband. It's almost an absolute. And guys, you do not realize the incredible power that you have to lower or raise your wife's value or self-worth by how you respond to her. Your wife desperately needs your unconditional approval. Now, ladies, if anything I just said has an ounce of truth in it, let your husband know right now by squeezing his hand real tight. Message received? Thanks be to God.